3D games, real polygonal 3D games on the Sega, whatever you want to call it, the Mega Drive, the Genesis, that's the voyage we're on today. There's enough of them that this won't be all of them, or even most of them probably, just some of them. Let's start with Steel Talons from 1992, a home version of the Atari arcade game released the year before. A lot stripped back, as these things always were. The arcade original was based on the same technology as the better known hard driving and stun runner, stuff that home systems of the era could never keep up with. Lower frame rates, lower resolution, lower polygon counts, the Sega home version is just lower all round, but maybe not lower than the competition. Yes, a version of this is one of the few 3D games to appear on the Super NES without the aid of the Super FX chip, and side by side you can see that the Mega Drive is better at this sort of thing, kind of. More happening on the screen in terms of 3D on the Sega side, the Super NES filling in the details with 2D backgrounds, but ultimately leaving things much more sparse. The frame rates are pretty similar, maybe favouring the Super NES actually, but that's got to be because it's so stripped back. There's less work to do, less to draw. That's the difficulty both machines face with 3D actually getting pixels on the screen. Neither of them was built with these sorts of graphics in mind. They were made for 2D, and that's what they were good at. The comparison is even more stark with Race Drivin, another rare 3D game that landed on both consoles. The Super NES comes off even worse here. Yes, this game's an all-round disaster on the Super NES, but it highlights the machine's different capabilities. In both cases, these two have to stitch together the bitmap display you need to draw 3D graphics with what resources they have. It's just that the Mega Drive does it better and faster. It's got a faster CPU that can compose the graphics in a RAM buffer faster, and it can transfer them to the video RAM to be turned into a TV picture more quickly too. It's got less overhead and a bit more throughput, or so I understand. Race Driving maybe runs a bit better than Steel Talons does, but both of these haven't aged that well as home console games. The original arcade games are still a lot of fun. If you ever get the chance to play Race Driving or Hard Driving in the proper arcade cab, it is fantastic. The stuttering home ports, well, not so much. But wait just a moment, let me interrupt here for a quick word from our sponsor for this video, Fume. What is Fume? Well, it's a flavoured air device that helps you fill the void left behind when you ditch your bad habits, giving you something satisfying to reach for instead of a vape or whatever. Flavoured air is fast becoming the best alternative to vaping, except it's nicotine-free, vapour-free and tastes great with a load of fantastic flavours. Fruity ones and minty ones and even licorice if that's your thing. Fume isn't magic. It's not going to solve all your problems, how I wish it would, but it can make things easier, and it does in the long run work out quite a bit cheaper than pretty much any alternative. You can get this cool magnetic stand, and you might be wondering why you would care about a magnetic stand, but honestly it really is fabulous. And also right now you can get these free toppers that go on the top, which are also strangely satisfying too. Go to tryfume.com/Chiropolis or scan the QR code and use code Chiropolis to get your free Fume topper when you order your journey pack today. So thank you Fume, we're back in the room and on with the show. So let's move on to something different, not an arcade port, but a DOS port, and one that hasn't been stripped back at all as far as I can tell. From 1991, it's M1 Abrams Battle Tank. Originally developed by Dynamics for PC DOS, not the ZX Spectrum Dynamic, but another one, Dynamics with an X, an American company who worked a lot with Electronic Arts. This does have a strong Spectrum link though, because it was ported by Real Time Games, who developed amongst other things Star Strike and Star Strike 2, as well as the multi-platform Carrier Command. A good choice because after developing some very impressively optimised 3D on the old Specky, doing it on the Mega Drive must have seemed like easy mode. Certainly the optimization skills carried through because this runs really well with a very solid frame rate throughout. Yes, okay, much of the time there's not that much to draw, but even when things get busier, it holds up well. The attract sequence probably shows off the 3D capabilities better than anything else I could find in the game. Maybe later on you get more 3D action, but I couldn't get that far. More importantly though, this feels like a fun game. It's enjoyable to play. There's been a lot of time and effort put into it. There's a few of these 3D combat style games on the Jenny Drive with planes and tanks and various things, but I think this might be the best one. There's lots of in-game systems to mess around with, lots of missions to explore. It feels pretty in-depth whilst still being accessible. It's not just being carried along by the novelty of it being in a 3D world, which so many games, not just on the Mega Drive but other 16-bit home systems, often relied on. But speaking of other 16-bit systems, this looks absolutely nothing like a Mega Drive game, does it? If you saw this footage without knowing what it was, Sega is probably not what you would be thinking. It looks for all the world like a home computer game rather than the ultra-colourful pixel art you'd expect. In fact, none of these games really look like Mega Drive games at all, and that goes double for this next one, Star Cruiser. A Japanese exclusive, this one, a weird, indescribable hybrid of genres, which would probably make more sense if you're immersed in the world of Japanese home computer games, but if you're not, it's a little bit baffling. I don't know how this ended up on the Mega Drive. It's really not typical, of course. It looks a lot different than the other versions of Star Cruiser 2. It doesn't seem to be a direct port of any of those. It does run well though, and I guess is more than anything else a first-person shooter, and an early pioneering one at that. It's definitely very 3D though, but, well, I do wonder if I'm detecting some raycasting here, not actual polygonal 3D. That's the technology behind the original generation of first-person shooters like Wolfenstein, which constructs the scene out of horizontal strips, but this is something I wanted to avoid in this video. Raycasting is its own thing, and there's enough raycasting games on the Mega Drive like Bloodshot for it to be deserving of its own video. On the other hand though, there's plenty of stuff in Star Cruiser that does seem to be proper polygon-based 3D as well, like this intro sequence for a start. Even in these first-person shooter sections that make up the bulk of the game's action sequences, there looks to be lots of polygon-based 3D models too. A clever idea that I'm sure improves performance. The type of raycasting being used here is very efficient, but it does have limitations in what it can display, so augmenting it with polygon-based 3D adds things that would otherwise be impossible. When you include the 2D backgrounds and the pixel art in the dialogue and the menu sequences, this looks like a game that tries to do everything all at once. Really impressive for a console game from 1990. You might even make some comparisons to Star Fox from a few years later. This sadly never saw release outside of Japan though, and what we are seeing here is the very well done but unofficial translation patch from Nebulous Translations, but perhaps this could have done well in the West. It was slated for some sort of release, but that never happened. Maybe it was just too far away from what console gamers were expecting at the time. It looks all round like nothing else on the console, and visually is quite a long way from Star Fox 2 really. That was of course aided by the Super FX chip, but Star Cruiser had no such help. It's just the stock Mega Drive running these 3D sequences. Sega didn't go in for that kind of thing all that much, famously preferring separate add-ons like the 32X and Sega CD, but this next game is an exception. The one and only Mega Drive game with an extra processor built into the cartridge. It's Virtua Racing. A conversion of Sega's own arcade game by Sega themselves, and a major tentpole release for the Mega Drive thanks to the technology included in the cartridge. Yes, this features the Sega SVP chip, essentially Sega's version of the Nintendo Super FX chip, but reputedly more powerful. Lots of sources say this, but hard numbers aren't really reported anywhere though. honestly, Virtua Racing does have a higher frame rate and probably more polygons than most Super FX games. It certainly seems to be a bit of a cut above graphically than Stunt Race FX, the closest Super FX equivalent game. The inner workings of the SVP chip are different in the sense that it's a totally different CPU in there with a different architecture, but the same in the sense that this really isn't a GPU. It's a general purpose programmable CPU made to produce 3D graphics rather than anything like what we would call a GPU today. This chip's true capabilities have never really been explored, though there is just one game for it, unlike the Super FX, which, even though it had a very small library, it did get to show off its capabilities a bit more with not just polygonal 3D but raycasting and even 2D graphics. This aside, Virtua Racing on the Mega Drive is pretty much just a straight port of the arcade with very few extra features. It's essentially just the same 3 tracks, though it does add time trials and a 2-player mode. The graphics aren't quite as impressive as they are on Sega's powerful Model 1 arcade hardware, but they still have that characteristic look, nothing like a Mega Drive game in short. It plays pretty well too, silly, fun arcade racing. Don't expect any sort of sim elements here, though it is let down a bit by 2 issues. Firstly, whilst you do get the alternate camera angles of the arcade here, you don't get the analog controls. I don't think that was even an option on the Mega Drive. It's a digital D-pad or nothing, which does take the edge off a bit, forcing you to just stab left and right to stay in control. Secondly, maybe it's just me, but it is pretty difficult to parse what's going on. It's a bit busy, isn't it? Too much happening and not enough contrast. I like it though, I do enjoy it, but probably not enough to have paid £70 or $100 that this cost when new, and you can pretty much double that to get the cost in today's money. It's not that expensive on eBay now, by the way, but yes, that's how much it cost back then, but perhaps your money could have been better spent elsewhere. This might be the most technically impressive 3D racer on the Genesis, but still not the best. That, I would say, goes to Kawasaki Superbike Challenge. Still very much an arcade racer and still with polygonal 3D graphics, but with a bit more depth to the gameplay and a few less polygons. It doesn't lack a sense of speed though, and it doesn't do too bad on the frame rate either, sitting solidly at 15 frames per second in normal mode, the same as Virtua Racing, and going a bit higher than that in turbo mode, a graphically slimmed down version of the game tuned for a higher frame rate. There's a lot of content here too, 15 tracks in all, allowing for a proper championship mode at various difficulties, making this feel much more like a proper game than just an arcade showpiece. Yes, it's minimalist, but the 3D still looks pretty good and you can at least see what is going on. It's got to be amongst the absolute best you'll see on a standard 16-bit home machine. Again, very un-Mega Drive-y. You'd easily mistake this for an Amiga or Atari ST game if you didn't know better. In fact, developer Lancor previously developed Vroom on the ST and Amiga, a legendary racer on both those machines, and more or less ported it to the Mega Drive as Formula 1 in 1993. This then is a spiritual successor to that and presumably is based on an upgraded version of the same engine. This goes much harder on the 3D though, lots more scenery and grandstands and what have you on display for an impressive demo of the Mega Drive's capabilities in this regard. A thing I love and am slightly baffled by is the bike's tinted windscreen, which shows the view through it in a darker colour. This is very puzzling because one thing the Mega Drive can't do is transparency effects, unlike the Super NES which had that capability built in. The closest you could get usually is mesh transparency, which is essentially a tightly spaced grid which when viewed on a blurry CRT does look sort of like transparency. So how does this work? Well, I honestly don't know. I'm going to guess it's using the Mega Drive's shadow mode, which switches the colour palette to a darker set of shades. I had no idea though that it could be used on such a small, non-regularly shaped area of the screen to pick out a detail like this. There don't seem to be any Mega Drive emulators with as comprehensive debugging tools as you'll find on the Super NES, so I'm struggling to track down exactly how this worked, but it looks great though. Overall, a better game than Virtua Racing, but it really didn't get good reviews at the time, and I don't know why, because it really does seem good, though. When this came out in 94, 95, things were moving very fast, and anything that wasn't the newly launched PlayStation was starting to seem like ancient history. Which possibly explains the fate of the very last game on this list, ResQ. Due to be released in 1994, this game never saw the light of day as an official release, emerging only as a fairly complete beta on the internet years later. You might be wondering why on earth it's seeing the light of day now though in this video, because it's very clearly not 3D. In fact, it looks very like a straightforward run and gun platformer, standard in the 16-bit era. The graphics were apparently designed on Amiga's running deluxe paint, and yeah, you can tell it's got that look, but it's not the main game here that I'm interested in, but the bonus levels. Yes, it is now 3D, and wouldn't you believe it, it looks suspiciously like a certain Nintendo game on the Super NES. The Star Fox tribute may be done in polygonal 3D in a very similar style. It's decently smooth and has a reasonable frame rate. In fact, most of the time it's probably got a better frame than the actual original Star Fox did. It's quite simple, yes, there's not all that much happening on screen, but still impressive that this can be done on the base Mega Drive without any extra help, which this assuredly doesn't have. There isn't much detail on the story of this game online, but it seems like this came close to completion but was then canned when the bottom dropped out of the Mega Drive market in the mid-90s. I'm speculating here, but I do wonder if the bonus stages were maybe designed to be their own game before being rolled into this project. Not quite enough to stretch out into a full game, but way too good to be completely forgotten about. Interestingly, these stages were programmed by Bill Pullian, who's had quite a long career, including way back when, developing another game on the Amiga called Aquaventura. It sounds like a water park. There actually is a water park called Aquaventura, but I don't think they're related. But, well, this also looks quite Star Fox-like, except it came out before Star Fox. In fact, it was demoed as early as 1989 and famously spent years in development hell. Yes, the plot thickens. It might sound a bit unlikely that there could be any connection, but Star Fox was developed by British company Argonaut Software, and I think there might have been some cross-pollination here. Anyway, ResQ's bonus stages might not be quite as much as a rip-off as they first seem, but a sort of cheeky nod to a friendly rival, though they aren't the only Star Fox action on the Mega Drive. There's also this Star Fox tech demo developed by Sega 68K, which looks absolutely fabulous, a sort of actual remake of Star Fox, but there doesn't seem to be a publicly available download of this yet, just this video footage. There is an earlier version of this out there that you can play, which isn't quite as impressive, but this is definitely something to watch out for in the future. But this has got to be the end for this video. Time to say goodbye, and thank you as always to my wonderful Patreons. Your help is so richly appreciated. If you would like to join them and help me out, there is a link below, and I will say thank you for watching and goodbye.